Before we start, don't just scroll past this one. What you're about to hear isn't a rumor. It's a story that's been whispered through prison walls for years. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment if you've ever heard of Pelican Bay's shadow unit, and let's dive into the block no one's supposed to know exists. The story starts at 3:17 a.m., deep inside Pelican Bay State Prison. The surveillance footage, what little remains, shows a single figure being led down a dim corridor known as D Block South Annex. The man's wrists are chained, his orange jumpsuit faded to brown from years of wear. His name was Elias Monroe, inmate number 146728, serving life without parole for a triple homicide in Oakland. He never made it back. According to the logbook, Monroe was transferred for interrogation, but there's no record of who signed him out. No paperwork, no return entry, just a single, jagged signature that looks like it was written in a rush, and one camera feed that cuts to static the second he disappears behind that steel door marked this unit. For weeks, nobody asked questions. Transfers happened all the time in Pelican Bay, especially with high-risk inmates. But when Monroe's cellmate, an old-timer named Virgil Price, started asking around, guards warned him to drop it if you want to wake up tomorrow. That's when things started getting strange. 3 nights later, Virgil heard something. A metallic echo beneath the floor of their cell, like chains being dragged through the concrete. He pressed his ear to the vent and swore he could hear voices pleading. Not yelling, not fighting, pleading. The next morning, he told another inmate in the yard. By sunset, that inmate was in the infirmary with a dislocated jaw and 2 broken ribs. Then Virgil disappeared too. The official report claimed he was transferred to Corcoran State Prison for medical evaluation. But no bus logs, no escort reports, nothing confirmed it. In fact, Corcoran had no record of his arrival. He was simply gone. Rumors spread like wildfire. Inmates said there was a hidden subblock beneath D Block. Some called it the pit, others called it shadow unit. It was supposedly built decades ago for high-value prisoners, gang leaders, snitches, or anyone who posed a threat to the system. But the way the old guards told it, shadow unit wasn't for punishment, it was for erasure. And the proof came one morning when a rookie correctional officer named Daniel Klein reported something on his first week. He'd been assigned to escort duty on D Block. When he took a wrong turn past the medical wing, he found a rusted service door with a biometric lock, one that wasn't on any of the prison maps. He swore he heard muffled screams from the other side. That night, Klein filed an incident report. By morning, it was gone from the system. 2 days later, he resigned and left Crescent City entirely. Nobody saw him again. So what really happens behind that unmarked door? Who runs shadow unit? And how many men have gone in without ever coming out? When Elias Monroe first arrived at Pelican Bay, he wasn't afraid. He was angry. He'd spent most of his adult life behind walls, but Pelican Bay was different. The air was thicker, the silence heavier. Every corner of the place seemed to breathe hostility. Guards didn't talk much here, they watched. Monroe was a former enforcer for the Dogtown Kings, a Bay Area crew known for doing dirty work that bigger organizations didn't want to touch. He'd been locked up for over a decade, but even behind bars, his name still carried weight. That's what made him valuable and dangerous. The first few weeks were quiet. He kept to himself, worked in laundry, and didn't bother anyone. But everything changed the night a guard named Sergeant Reeves approached him during count. Reeves wasn't like the other COs. He was calm, precise, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. He slid a folded note through Monroe's cell bars. "You want to get out of Pelican Bay alive?" he said quietly. "You're going to help me with something." The note contained one name, T. Garland. Garland was an inmate from B Block, a known informant who had testified against a corrections officer years earlier. Most men avoided him, but Reeves wanted Garland gone, and he wanted Monroe to make it happen. Monroe didn't ask questions. He was desperate for protection. Pelican Bay had already taken 2 of his former crew members, both stabbed within a month of arrival. So, when Reeves offered him a way out, a transfer to a lower security facility, Monroe agreed. The plan was simple: a staged fight in the yard. Garland would accidentally fall on a sharpened toothbrush handle, and Monroe would take a short stint in the SHU, secure housing. In exchange, Reeves promised to erase a disciplinary record that would have kept Monroe locked in solitary for years. But things went wrong. Very wrong. On the morning of the hit, the yard was half empty, the air thick with fog. Monroe walked toward Garland like it was any other day. They exchanged a few words, nothing unusual. Then, as Monroe reached for the handle tucked in his sleeve, Garland turned first. He already had a weapon. Before Monroe could react, Garland slashed across his shoulder, opening a deep gash. Blood spilled onto the gravel, and within seconds, the guards swarmed in, batons raised, sirens blaring. But the strange part? None of them touched Garland. They went straight for Monroe. He was dragged out of the yard, kicking and cursing, past the medical bay and into a corridor he'd never seen before. No signs, no cameras, just steel doors that seemed to hum with electricity. When he tried to speak, a guard jabbed a needle into his neck. The last thing Monroe remembered was Reeves standing at the end of the hall, arms crossed, saying, "Welcome to Shadow Unit, Elias. You just bought yourself a one-way ticket." When he woke up, everything was different. The light was dim, the air colder. There were no cellmates, no yard calls, no clocks. Just a concrete room and a speaker in the ceiling that clicked every few hours. A voice came through, flat and mechanical. Observation Phase 1 initiated. He wasn't in Pelican Bay anymore. At least, not the part anyone knew. And that's when Monroe realized the worst part. He wasn't alone. Someone was watching, listening, testing him. By the time Elias Monroe regained full consciousness, he couldn't tell how long he'd been in that concrete room. There were no windows, no clocks, not even the rhythm of prison life. No breakfast trays clanking, no echo of footsteps down the tier. Just silence, and the faint hum of a vent that never stopped. He tried shouting for a guard, but no one came. The only response was a burst of static from the ceiling speaker, followed by a calm voice he didn't recognize. "Mr. Monroe, you're part of an experimental unit. Cooperation ensures comfort. Resistance ensures pain." That was the first time he heard them. The voice never said who it belonged to. It gave no name, no title, just orders. The same calm tone, robotic and distant. Every few hours, the voice would ask questions about gang affiliations, criminal networks, past hits, people Monroe barely remembered. But the strange thing was they already knew the answers. It was like they weren't interrogating him. They were confirming something. Days passed, maybe weeks. He started to hear other sounds through the vent. Muffled breathing, a man whispering prayers, a scream that cut off mid-sentence. And then one night, it all changed. The speaker crackled alive, and instead of the usual monotone voice, Monroe heard something different. Two people talking, a man and a woman. The conversation wasn't meant for him. It was a feed that someone had accidentally left open. Man's voice, "How long do we keep them down there?" Woman's voice, "Until the files are clean. No one gets out until it's cleared at HQ." Man, "And if the recordings leak again?" Woman, "Then we burn the whole sublevel. Like last time." Then silence. That was the moment Elias Monroe realized Shadow Unit wasn't just a holding block. It was a cover operation. A place to bury men whose cases were too messy for the system to handle. Men who'd seen or heard something they weren't supposed to. But Monroe wasn't the only one to hear it. A maintenance worker named Luis Herrera, assigned to fix ventilation ducts on D Block, discovered something strange. While cleaning an unused control room, he found a series of digital tapes labeled unit surveillance. The timestamps matched nights when inmates had supposedly been transferred. Curiosity got the better of him. That night, Herrera took one of the drives home, plugged it into his laptop, and hit play. The audio was distorted, static, echoes, but through it he heard voices. "Please." Then a metallic buzz like an electric current. And the words, "Observation phase terminated. Subject 3 neutralized." Herrera panicked. He copied the files onto a flash drive and mailed it anonymously to a journalist at the Sentinel Tribune, a small investigative outlet in Los Angeles. 2 days later, Herrera didn't show up to work. His car was found abandoned outside Crescent City, keys still in the ignition, driver's side door open. No sign of struggle. No trace of him ever again. The Sentinel received the package, but before they could publish, federal agents raided their office, seizing every drive and backup under a national security directive. The journalist who opened the envelope, Marcy Leland, resigned a week later and left the country. Inside Pelican Bay, word spread fast. Inmates whispered that the tapes got out, but nobody knew who sent them or what they revealed. Back inside his cell, Monroe was losing his grip on time. His beard had grown long, his fingernails cracked. Then, one night, the vent blew out a single scrap of paper, smudged but legible. On it were 4 words written in pencil. "You're next for clearance." That was the first warning he'd ever received, and the last before everything spiraled out of control. By the time Elias Monroe received that note, his mind was fractured from weeks, maybe months, of isolation. He'd stopped counting the clicks from the ceiling vent. The lights never went off anymore, and his reflection in the metal toilet looked like a ghost he didn't recognize. But that single message, "You're next for clearance," snapped something back into focus. Someone, somewhere inside Shadow Unit, was trying to warn him. That night, Monroe decided he wouldn't wait for whatever clearance meant. He pressed his ear to the vent again, hoping for another sign of life. Instead, he heard something new, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving in unison. And then a metallic clank, like a bolt being drawn. The door slid open. 2 guards stepped in, their faces hidden behind black riot helmets with no visible ID numbers. Between them was a small cart carrying a steel briefcase and a medical tray. One of the guards spoke, his voice filtered through a voice modulator. "Elias Monroe. Observation phase complete. Prepare for clearance." Monroe's pulse kicked into overdrive. He demanded to know what clearance was. The guard didn't answer. The second one unlatched the briefcase, and that's when Monroe saw it. A syringe filled with a clear fluid, labeled only with a black X. Instinct took over. Monroe lunged. The tray crashed to the floor, metal echoing against the concrete. He caught one guard by surprise, shoving him into the wall. The other raised a baton, but Monroe was faster. He grabbed the guard's helmet, slammed it against the steel bunk, and sent him collapsing. Adrenaline blurred everything. He didn't know where he was running, just away. He tore down the corridor, past flickering lights and unmarked doors, until he stumbled into a hallway with glass panels on one side. Behind them were rows of computers, monitors showing live camera feeds from different cells, each labeled S1 through S12. He froze when he saw the screen labeled S9. It was Virgil Price, his old cellmate, the man who disappeared weeks earlier. He was strapped to a chair, his head slumped forward, surrounded by electrodes. A small red light above the camera blinked steadily. The monitor read, "Subject 9, status, pending clearance." Monroe's stomach dropped. Every inmate who'd vanished from Pelican Bay was here. Not transferred, not dead, just erased systematically, cleanly, under something called the clearance protocol. Before he could move, an alarm blared. Red lights bathed the corridor. A voice boomed through the speakers. "Containment breach in S Hall. Initiate lockdown." He ran, dodging flashing lights and closing gates, until he hit a door marked exit. Authorized personnel only. It required a key card, but luck, or fate, had left one dangling from the belt of the guard he'd just knocked out. When the lock clicked open, the world outside looked nothing like Pelican Bay. He wasn't in the main facility anymore. The exit led into an underground tunnel, old, reinforced concrete with moisture dripping from the pipes. Emergency lights flickered every 20 feet. He followed them until he reached a rusted elevator door. Inside, a faded sign read, "Restricted access, State Research Annex 03B." That was the first time Monroe understood Shadow Unit wasn't officially part of the prison at all. It was a joint operation, half correctional, half experimental, buried beneath the prison itself. He slammed the elevator button, praying it worked. The doors creaked shut and began to rise. For a few seconds, there was silence, until a faint voice came through the speaker above him. "Mr. Monroe, if you exit that lift, you will not make it 24 hours. Turn around, and you'll disappear quietly. Keep going, and you'll wish you had." The voice was calm, Familiar. It was Sergeant Reeves. Monroe's breathing slowed. "You set me up," he whispered. Reeves chuckled softly. "You were never supposed to live this long. But don't worry. Your file's already been cleared." When the elevator reached the surface, the doors opened to an empty, loading bay. Floodlights flickered, rain pounding the asphalt outside. Monroe stepped into the cold air for the first time in what felt like years, free but hunted. He vanished that night. No official escape report, no body found. Just one security cam image leaked months later. A blurry figure in an orange jumpsuit walking down Highway 101, rain pouring over his face. But the real shock came 2 weeks later, when someone mailed a USB drive to the Sentinel Tribune, the same outlet that had received the first recordings. Inside was an audio file titled Clearance_Protocol_Final. What was on it would force the California Department of Corrections into silence. The envelope that arrived at the Sentinel Tribune was unmarked. No return address, no postmark, nothing. Just a small brown packet, thin enough to slip through any mail slot. Inside was a USB drive, scratched and worn, labeled in red ink, Clearance_Protocol_Final. The editor, Marcy Leland, had seen this before. Months earlier, she'd received the first batch of Shadow Unit audio files, the ones that got her newsroom raided and nearly destroyed her career. But this time there was something different. The packet came with a single line written on the folded paper inside. From Elias Monroe. "Don't trust anyone in uniform." She hesitated before plugging it in. The newsroom was empty. Midnight. Only the hum of servers and the low rattle of an air vent. When she opened the file, a wave of static filled her headphones. Then a faint voice came through. Voice number 1. Reeves, subject 11 confirmed. Final clearance scheduled for tonight. Voice number 2. Unknown female. Has Central approved termination? Reeves, they don't need to. This one's a loose end. Then a metallic clatter. Chains. The sound of someone breathing heavily, panicked. The voice was muffled, but recognizable. Elias Monroe. "You said I'd walk out of here, Reeves." "Reeves, you did, Monroe. Just not the way you hoped." A low electric hum followed, like a generator spinning up, and then screaming. But halfway through the audio, the sound cut out. When it returned, it wasn't screaming anymore. It was conversation. Controlled. Cold. Female voice. Data extraction complete. Proceed with disposal. Reeves and the others? Female voice. Already cleared. No official record. No problem. Then a pause. Reeves, what about me? I'm not staying in this hole forever. Female voice. You're not. Your transfer's already been approved to DC. Click. End of file. Marcy sat frozen. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Data extraction? Disposal? DC? This wasn't just a rogue prison unit. It was something bigger. Something federal. She replayed the file 5 more times, trying to isolate the background noise. On the 4th loop, she caught it, 3 tones faint, buried in the static. She sent the waveform to a sound engineer she trusted, asking him to clean it up. What he sent back shook her. The tones weren't noise, they were an ID tag. An internal systems ping from a federal communications channel. Specifically one belonging to the Department of Homeland Security. That meant Shadow Unit wasn't just a secret prison. It was a black site data collection hub. Inmates weren't being punished. They were being used. Their memories, their knowledge, their voices, all recorded, analyzed, erased. When Marcy tried to reach her contact at DHS for confirmation, her phone went dead mid-call. Within an hour, her office keycard stopped working. By morning, government vehicles were parked across from her apartment, engines idling. She did what journalists do best. She ran. She copied the file to 3 encrypted drives and sent them to trusted colleagues across the country. But only one package arrived. The others vanished en route. 2 weeks later, the Sentinel published a brief, cryptic article under an anonymous byline. Sources within Pelican Bay suggest an undisclosed facility beneath D-Block was used for unauthorized federal operations. State officials deny the existence of such a unit. No comment has been provided by the Department of Corrections or Homeland Security. The article disappeared within 48 hours. The Sentinel's website went offline. Marcy's personal accounts were wiped. But before she vanished, she sent one last message to her team. If you hear the name Reeves again, record everything. He's not just a guard. He's the handler. That message became the key that cracked everything open. Because 3 months later, an internal whistleblower from the California DOC came forward with photos, names, and one classified document marked Project Meridian. And right there on the cover sheet was the signature, Sergeant Thomas Reeves. By the time Project Meridian surfaced, the system had already buried most of the evidence. Files were redacted, drives wiped, and every name linked to the shadow unit quietly reassigned or retired. But the whistleblower, an IT technician named Caleb Dunn, had one thing they didn't: backups. He'd worked in Pelican Bay's data center for 5 years, maintaining the prison's internal network. But late one night, while performing a system audit, he noticed a data stream that shouldn't have existed. Encrypted, untraceable, running from an unlisted server labeled S0 node. When he tried to disconnect it, the system automatically reconnected itself. Every 30 seconds, it uploaded a packet of audio, biometric, and psychological data to an off-site address. Dunn followed the digital trail, layer by layer, until it led him straight to a hidden partition in the Department of Homeland Security's infrastructure. The project codename at the top of the directory read Meridian. Inside were hundreds of files, each tagged with an inmate's ID from Pelican Bay, Corcoran, and San Quentin. But they weren't case files. They were profiles, detailed personality analyses, neural response maps, and stress response logs taken from weeks of covert sensory testing. Every one of them ended with the same line in bold red text. Subject cleared. Observation complete. Monroe's name was there too. His file was marked Priority Alpha. Next to it was a note dated 2 weeks before his disappearance. Demonstrates advanced resistance to interrogation stimuli. Reassignment to Meridian Phase 3 recommended. Dunn knew what that meant. Reassignment was code for human experimentation. He printed 3 pages, stuffed them in a binder, and walked out of the prison that same night. Hours later, he met with Marcy Leland, the same journalist who'd received Monroe's USB drive at a diner off Highway 101. He handed her the binder and said, "If this goes public, they'll kill us both. But people need to know." That meeting would be the last time anyone saw either of them alive. A week later, a fire broke out inside the Pelican Bay administration wing. It burned for nearly 12 hours before firefighters could contain it. Official reports called it an electrical malfunction, but those who'd worked in the prison knew better. The blaze started in the IT room, right where Dunn had worked. Every backup server, every storage disk reduced to ash, except one. A single external drive survived, pulled from a wreckage by a janitor who didn't even realize what he was holding. Months later, that drive ended up in the hands of a documentary producer working on a prison corruption special. When he decrypted it, he found a 12-minute video file labeled Meridian_visual_04. The footage opened with a timestamp, February 19th, 2019, unit control room. The camera panned over rows of monitors showing inmates sitting perfectly still, electrodes on their temples. The screen flickered and a voice spoke from off-camera, calm, clinical, unmistakable. "Reeves, they think this is punishment. What they don't know is they're saving us years of research. No lies, no emotion, no filters. Just raw human response." He paused, watching a monitor where Elias Monroe's image appeared. Eyes half closed, pulse steady. Reeves, continuing, "This one's special. He's still fighting it. Imagine what we could build from a mind that refuses to break." Then, another voice, female, the same one from the audio recordings. Female voice. "Washington wants results, not survivors." The video cut off there. The footage was leaked anonymously online under the tag, #ShadowUnitFiles. It spread fast, Reddit, X, dark web forums, but every trace vanished within 48 hours. Copyright strikes, DMCA removals, federal takedowns. Still, the damage was done. People had seen it. The story couldn't be contained anymore. Protests erupted outside Pelican Bay. Families of missing inmates demanded answers. And then, Out of nowhere, a photo surfaced, taken by a tourist driving near Crescent City. It showed a man walking down the coastline in a tattered orange jumpsuit, face shadowed by the setting sun. When zoomed in, his ID tag was still visible. Number 146728. Monroe. Some said it was fake. Others swore it was real. But if Elias Monroe was alive, it meant one thing. Someone had escaped the shadow unit. For months, the photo of the man in the orange jumpsuit spread like wildfire across the internet. Forums, news sites, even local radio stations picked it up. Some called him a hoax, another internet myth fueled by conspiracy junkies. But others recognized the scars, the walk, the unmistakable profile. It was Elias Monroe. But if he was alive, the question was, why hadn't he spoken? 3 months after the photo surfaced, an anonymous encrypted email landed in the inbox of an independent journalist named Aaron Blake, who had been following the Shadow Unit story since the first leak. The subject line read, "You're looking in the wrong place. I'm not gone. Yem." Attached was a video file, grainy, recorded on what looked like an old burner phone. The frame showed a dimly lit motel room. A figure sat on the edge of the bed, face obscured by shadow, but the voice was unmistakable. "They thought they could erase me. But you can't erase something that's already dead to the system." Elias Monroe leaned into the light, gaunt, hollow-eyed, his skin mapped with burn scars and needle marks. Pelican Bay wasn't just a prison. It was a lab. They called it Project Meridian. They wanted to find out how much pain a man could take before he stopped being human. He coughed, eyes flicking toward the camera. "They took our memories, our fears, even our dreams. We weren't inmates. We were subjects. They used us to build psychological algorithms, to predict behavior, control it." Monroe raised a trembling hand, showing a deep scar running across his wrist. "Every time I broke, they logged it. Every time I fought back, they recorded it. They built a model from our pain, and they're still using it. In federal prisons, in interrogation rooms, maybe even in your phones." The camera shook slightly, as if someone else was in the room. Monroe's tone shifted, his voice breaking between rage and exhaustion. Reeves was never a guard. He was part of a contract division. He answered to nobody in uniform. The real prison wasn't under Pelican Bay. It was under Washington. He reached into his pocket and held up a flash drive. "Everything you need is on this. Proof. Names. The clearance logs. Don't take it to the police. Don't take it to the press. Take it to the people." The screen flickered. In the background, a knock echoed on the motel door. Then another. Monroe's eyes darted toward the sound. He whispered, "They found me." The video ended abruptly. No follow-up. No confirmation. The motel room was later found abandoned. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just an unplugged phone, a torn bedsheet, and the words "Meridian ends here" scratched into the mirror with a piece of glass. The flash drive was never recovered. But the message, Monroe's last confession, was enough. Within weeks, civil rights groups launched lawsuits against the Department of Corrections and Homeland Security. The state denied everything. The federal government issued no comment. Yet several high-ranking officials quietly resigned. And Sergeant Reeves? He vanished too. His last known location was Washington, D.C., filed under classified transfer. Some say he's still out there, buried in another agency under another name. Others claim he was silenced like the rest. But every now and then, a new leak appears, an audio clip, a document header, a surveillance image stamped as unit, as if Monroe's story refuses to die. And if you listen closely, if you dig deep enough into the prison archives, you'll find an entry that shouldn't exist. D Block South Annex, Cell 14, active occupant. Name, Monroe Elias. Status, under observation. So maybe he never escaped. Maybe the man in the photo wasn't free at all, just part of another phase of Project Meridian. Either way, one thing is certain. The Shadow Unit was real. And if you think it ended at Pelican Bay, you haven't been paying attention. If this story shook you, share it. Don't let it vanish like they wanted. Hit that like, drop a comment, and subscribe so more people learn the truth they'll never hear on the news. Because sometimes the only light left in the dark is the one we keep alive.